Good evening. Today's topic is global monetary system and foreign exchange markets and its implications on international business. When we try to learn international business, different aspects of international business strategy and international business, understanding exchange rates and how the monetary system works and what kind of risk management strategies are required from exporters' point of view or importers' point of view. This is very much required to manage the business successfully. So we will start with global monetary system, and I would like to have this as an interactive session. I have two sets of slides for today's sessions, and after every 4 or 5 slides, I would like you to come with the points that you learn based on the topic. Otherwise, I will have some question to ask you as well. Yeah. Purchasing power parity theory. So let me start with exchange rate theories or monetary theories, because these theories help explaining the monetary system and exchange rates. Purchasing power parity theory, interest rate parity theory, known as international Fisher effect. So these theories serve as fundamental theories to explain what is exchange rate and how does exchange rate fluctuate and what will be the direction of fluctuations and so on. So let me explain these theories one by one so that you will have clarity about how this theory is relevant to global monetary system and exchange rate fluctuations. As you know, exchange rate fluctuates every day these days. So exchange rate fluctuates within a day as well. So every minute exchange rate can fluctuate in the interbank market. And even for customers, when you ask for exchange rates, banks quote you an exchange rate, which is a fluctuating exchange rate. So let's say you ask for exchange rate at 10 a.m. and you ask an exchange rate at 2 p.m. It may not be same. So this is how the exchange market or foreign exchange market operates. So let's start with purchasing power parity theory. This is a very basic fundamental theory in the area of exchange rates and international business. And according to this theory, exchange rate is simply the rate that equalizes the price of the identical product or service in different countries or currencies. And here, Titanic movie's ticket price in Japan, for example, this is basically this theory gives an explanation of what is an exchange rate, and so here, so exchange rate is simply the rate that equalizes the price of the identical product or service in different currencies or countries. For example, Titanic movie in Japan. In case if you go for a movie theater, if you go to watch this movie in a movie theater in Japan, and its ticket price is 90 Japanese yen. And in case if you go and watch the same movie in the US, and if the ticket price in the US is $1, in that case, according to this theory gives us information that $1 should be equal to 90 Japanese yen. This is the theory. It should be equal to 90 Japanese yen. So it's basically purchasing power parity theory gives you an explanation of what is an exchange rate. Interest rate parity theory. So here, interest rate parity theory, this is another theory. This is different from purchasing power parity theory. This theory explains exchange rate fluctuations or exchange rates in terms of interest rate parity. For example, for any country, spot exchange rate should change in an equal amount, but in the opposite direction to the difference in nominal interest rates between the two countries. The US nominal interest rate is higher than euros, reflecting greater expected inflation rates. Dollar should fall by that interest rate differential in the future. Interest rates in the US is 6%, in the euro area if it is 4%, reflecting 2% higher expected inflation in the US. Value of US dollar should fall by 2% against euro. Yeah, so this is another point. So here, spot exchange rate should change in an equal amount, but in the opposite direction to the difference in nominal interest rate between two countries. So here, this theory called interest rate parity theory. Fundamentally, exchange rate is considered, or exchange rate can be considered as a function of interest rate differences in two different currencies. For example, as you know, you might know that US dollar has about 2% or 2.5% interest rate on an average in case if you borrow money and all. But in case you borrow money in Japanese yen, the interest rate is less than what it is in the US. And if you borrow money in some other countries like Argentina or India, those kind of countries, interest rate is much higher. So in general, interest rates in developing countries are relatively higher compared to developed countries. So interest rate, high interest rate means money multiplication is high in those countries. For any two countries, spot exchange rate should change in an equal amount, but in the opposite direction to the difference in nominal interest rates between the two countries. Yeah, so this is the theory. And if the US nominal interest rate is higher than the euros, reflecting greater expected inflation rates, dollar should fall by that interest rate differential in the future. If interest rate in the US is 6% and in the euro it is 4%, reflecting 2% higher expected inflation in the US, the value of US dollar should fall by 2% against euro. Yeah, so this is another important point. So yeah, you can see if the US, just look at the second sentence, if the US nominal interest rate means an interest rate that you get from bank, is higher than euro. In case if that is higher than euro, reflecting greater expected inflation rates, dollar should fall by that interest rate differential in the near future, If interest rate in the US is 6% and in euro area it is 4%, reflecting 2% higher expected inflation in the US, value of USD should fall by 2% against euro. Yeah, so here it's a very simple example. If the interest rate in the US is 6%, euro it is 4%. You can expect 2% money multiplication, or you can expect that the worth of money is less 2% in the US compared to euro, which also means 2% higher inflation in the US compared to inflation rate in euro. This means that the value of US dollar should fall by 2% against euro, going by these fundamentals, going by these interest rates in two different countries. So interest rate parity theory, the proponents of interest rate parity theory explain that exchange rate is a function of interest rate differentials.
So, Professor, that means that the nominal interest rate is equal to the real interest rate plus the inflation rate.
Nominal interest rate and real interest rate, the only difference is that nominal interest rate doesn't take into account the inflation rate. So nominal interest rate minus inflation is the real interest rate. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So basically, this theory is not really concerned about, they are not classifying real versus nominal interest rate, but the theory, according to the theory, if interest rate in a specific country is high, that means there will be high inflation in that country compared to another country with less inflation. And if inflation is high in a specific country compared to another country, exchange rate of high inflation country will depreciate. Okay. This is the theory. International monetary system refers to institutional arrangement that countries adopt to govern exchange rates. Gold standard and international monetary system has different arrangements to govern exchange rates. And this include, like, this is the historical perspectives of global monetary system. Whatever we study, we need to also look at the past, present, and future. So if you look at the exchange rate system, which can also be called as global monetary system or monetary system, it evolved from gold standard. Long ago, there was something called gold standard, and then there was a fixed exchange rate system, and then there was a floating rate system, and then there was a pegging rate system. So this is how it operates, or it evolved. Pegging currencies to gold and guaranteeing convertibility is known as gold standard. Given a common gold standard, exchange rate was easy to determine. Under this, $1 was equal to 23 grains of fine gold. And gold standard worked well from 1870s until the start of World War I. Yeah, so here, gold standard worked well from 1870s until the start of World War I. Yeah, so here, before the World War I, the currencies were not set up properly like what we have currencies these days. It was used to be, gold standard means, each, like US dollar was pegged. It used to be a pegging against the dollar. And it was like, $1 was equal to 23.22 grains of pure fine gold. Fixed exchange rate system called Bretton Woods system. IMF was set in 1946 as part of Bretton Woods Conference in the US. Exchange rate system under IMF required member countries to fix parities of the currencies in terms of US dollars or gold. Yeah, so this is called the fixed exchange rate system or Bretton Woods system. And IMF was set up, so there's up is missing in that. So IMF was set up in 1946 as part of Bretton Woods Conference in the US. Exchange rate system under IMF required member countries to fix parities of their currencies in terms of US dollars or gold. inflation in the US during 1969 to 1971, and the announcement by the US president to end this fixed exchange rate brought an end to the system. Under this system, after the World War II, International Monetary Fund or IMF was set up, and this was IMF was set up as part of the Bretton Woods Conference in the US. And the system that they developed, exchange rate system that they developed under IMF, required member countries to fix parities of their currencies in terms of US dollars or gold. And this system worked well during 1945 to 1971. And what happened is that, there was a felt need for determining exchange rates based on market forces, supply and demand. And the system worked well during 1945 to 1971. So there was high inflation in the US during 1968, 69 to 71. And the US government was thinking about how to combat the inflation rate. And then they decided that maybe ending this fixed exchange rate system might be better for the US, and they decided that we will no longer have fixed exchange rate system. Fixed exchange rate system means, the exchange rate of US dollar is fixed against currencies, other country currencies also. So IMF decided the rate, let's say $1 will be equal to 0.8 pounds sterling, that kind of system, Yeah. Floating rate system. Floating rate system was formalized in 1976 by IMF when IMF members met in Jamaica. Yeah, this was formalized in 1976 when IMF members met in Jamaica. Countries got monetary policy autonomy under floating rate system. Yeah, so floating rate system means exchange rate get determined as a function of supply and demand. Determination of exchange rates based on market forces, supply and demand. And there was a meeting, there was an IMF meeting in Jamaica. IMF consists of many member countries from all over the world, different regions in the world. And countries, every country, almost all countries, each country got monetary policy autonomy under floating rate system. So this is a exchange rate. The decision was to float the exchange rate under market forces, and they decided that let the exchange rate value get determined as a result of supply and demand factor, which means total inflow and outflow of foreign currencies on a given day in a given country. That will be the deciding factor. Suppose if total outflow of dollar from the US on a given day, or total inflow of dollar or total inflow of pound sterling versus US dollar on a given day in the US markets, because this is an electronic market. So as a result, total inflow and outflow of two different currencies, that will decide the exchange rate in the market. This is the market-based exchange rate system called floating rate system. So International Monetary Fund or IMF formalized this system and called for or asked member countries to join the system in 1976. And countries got monetary policy autonomy under floating rate system. So floating rate system, according to the floating rate system, when foreign exchange market forces determine the relative value of a currency, the country is adhering to a floating exchange rate system. This means, so relative value of currency is determined as a result of inflow and outflow. Free float and managed float system. There are again, the floating rate system can be classified as free float and managed float system. This means, free float means completely exchange rate is a function of market forces, that's free floats, and managed float systems. Managed float system means exchange rate is a function of market forces, but exchange rate is managed, regulated by central bank in the country or in the respective country. This is how it works. So free float and managed float system. So classification of floating rate system, I'm explaining this one more time. Free floating and managed floating rate system. First one, free floating rates. Exchange rate is determined by market forces such as demand and supply. Central bank does not intervene exchange rates at all. In the US, Federal Reserve Bank is a central bank. And Federal Reserve Bank doesn't intervene exchange rate determination. There, the policy is to let the exchange rate get determined as a result of market forces. And manage floating rates. Exchange rates are determined by market forces, but with the intention of central bank as and when the authorities feel the requirement. Yeah. So manage float means market forces decide the exchange rate, but with the intervention of central bank as and when authorities feel the requirement. So here,
So basically, the difference between both of them is that in one the central bank intervene, and in the other the central bank doesn't intervene at all.
yes. So for example, in China, therefore follow managed floating exchange rate. Managed floating exchange rate means exchange rate is determined by market forces, how much demand and supply of two different currencies, and in that process exchange rate get determined. But Chinese government bank, Chinese central bank, People Bank of China, they use their discretion. Suppose in case if they think that their exchange rate should not fluctuate beyond a limit, so then they will monitor, and they will, they will not let the exchange rate move in a direction which is so let's say they don't want to see that Chinese yuan is not falling or not depreciating beyond the limit that they like. In that case, Chinese central bank, Chinese People Bank of China, they can intervene in the market and they can temporarily fix the exchange rate whenever they feel that there is a requirement to intervene. So yeah, so this is what we did, you know. Sorry, this is what so they do it in China. You know, some other countries also they used to do it. In India, they used to do this way, manage floating rate system, but now they have you know, now they have a different policy. Now they have free floating rate system. So this is important. Pegging implies that the value of pegged currency moves along with the currency to which it is pegged. This is another system. Okay, so before I go on to pegging, you have any question based on 3-4 slides that I discussed? Anybody, any question? Any of this?
I have a question regarding the managing floating rates. The managing floating rate. Since in that the central bank intervene, is there's any level of like maintain like a level of reserve, like they have a reserve limit, or there is a reserve, that an amount of reserve that is required by this kind of system.
It's their discretion. So, you know, sometimes they want to boost the export. If they want to boost the export, they are happy with the depreciation of their local currency. Sometimes they want to control imports. So depending upon that, suppose, you know, if they want to discourage imports, then they will act accordingly. You know, if they want to discourage, I mean, you know, if they want to encourage export, local depreciation is good. But if they want to, you know, so depending upon the policy, suppose in case if local currency depreciates, their imports will be very expensive. Suppose if a country is very much import intensive, that country will not like to see that their currency is depreciating or falling. Okay.
Thank you.
Because what happens if a currency is falling, if that country is buying a lot of item, importing a lot of item, their total cost will increase. So that kind of countries with dependence on importing, would not like to see that their currency is falling. Pegging is another system which implies that the value of pegged currency moves along with currency to which it is pegged. For example, Lithuanian Lita has been pegged to euro. Lita will fall or rise in same direction of euro against other currencies. UAE dirham has been pegged to USD. This means dirham will fall against other currencies if USD falls against other currencies. So yeah, so this is the case like when Lithuania, I don't know whether you know Lithuania is a European Union country. It was a former Soviet Union country. I actually taught a a course there. I stayed there for 2 months and I taught an intensive course in 2 months in Lithuania, University in Vilnius, Lithuania. So, and Lithuanian Litha, they used to get pegged to euro because it was their desire at that time. It was 10 years ago, Lithuanian Litha, the local currency. They wanted to join euro. So in order to join euro, European Central Bank had set some criteria. And according to European Central Bank criteria, Litha will fall or rise in same direction of euro against other currencies. Yeah. So this is the where, they pegged the euro. They pegged Litha against euro, because if they peg, the central bank of that country has the responsibility to ensure that their local currency is moving in the same direction of euro against other currencies. So this is how it works. Yeah.
I was thinking about that it's not very fair for that currency. Like, for example, if the Lithuanian Lita is pegged to the euro, if, for example, the euro goes down, the Lithuania will go down with the euro.
If it is pegged, if euro is down against dollar, Lithuanian Litha also will be down.
Yeah.
For example, UAE dirham. Let's talk about this. Now it's a real situation in UAE. Okay, United Arab Emirates, Dubai. You know Dubai. This is the country where Dubai is located. UAE dirham, and UAE dirham is pegged to US dollar even now. Okay, so as a result, what happens is, if US dollar is falling against other currencies in the world, UAE dirham will also fall against other currencies. Okay.
Yes.
You understand?
Yes, and I understand.
Everybody else? Hey guys, do you follow me?
Yes.
Yes, Professor.
And then UAE implement that policy because UAE government want to see that their currency is moving in the same direction that the dollar moves. That is their idea. That is their interest. And that is the reason they have pegged their currency against dollar, which means if US dollar is appreciating against euro, or US dollar is appreciating against Chinese yuan or Japanese yen, UAE dirham will also appreciate. And UAE central bank has to monitor their fluctuations daily basis, and they are not doing the market floating system. They are not, when a currency is pegged, that means they don't have floating rate system. Okay. Okay, so now it's your turn to answer a couple of questions. The first question is, and I call up your name so that you can answer easily, so that we will have everybody participating in the discussion process. Yeah, so first question is, distinguish between purchasing power parity theory and interest rate parity theory. Let's start with Jafat. Yeah, Jafat will answer this question and others can add their own answers also. And question number 2, Gabriel will answer and everybody else can add their answer too. And question number 3, Noberto will answer and everybody can add their points. And number 4, Jennifer will answer and the others can also add their points. Yeah. Jafat.
Yes, I'm here. I think that it says that distinguish between purchasing power parity theory and interest parity theory. From what we discussed here today, the purchasing power parity theory it's just exchange rate is simply the rate that equalizes the price of the identical product in different currencies or countries. And if in the interest rate parity theory, I don't really, I feel it's better explaining it with the example of in the PowerPoint, that it says like if the interest rate in the US is 6% and in the euro area is at 4%, basically the value of the USD should fall like 2% against the euro. So that's, I think that's more the difference between the purchase of the price of the identical product in different currencies and the difference in the nominal interest rate on what should fall between the currencies.
Yes. Any other answers? I want at least one more answer. You know, for every question, I want somebody to answer first, and then at least one more answer to contribute in the discussion. Because if you participate in the discussion, I understand that you follow me. Otherwise, I don't get clarity whether you follow me or not.
Oh, Professor, I think that also for the interest parity theory, I think that also we can add the Fisher effect that the book talks about. It adds that we can like equalize the interest rate is equal to the sum of the real rate of interest and the expected rate of inflation. I think that that kind of equation is very important to that theory.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
So we move on to question number 2. Question number 2 is distinguish between free float and managed float exchange rate system. Yeah, it's Gabriel, right?
Yeah. Hi, Professor. Yeah. So I mean, the floating system in itself, it's basically uh, uh, driven by market forces. Basically, demand and supply, inflow, outflow, as you mentioned. The free float is basically an arrangement where the government doesn't intervene. Basically, it's purely market forces managing or setting a price for the currency. Whereas for managed float exchange, you do have government intervention. The central bank doesn't intervene to try to uh, uh, set a price, probably in a case where it's going too low, more often than not, and selling the currency or like in the example that you mentioned, the example of the book as well, the Indian rupees were going down, so the central bank intervened to sell their U.S. currency, which is what the example used, and try to set it higher as opposed to, or in terms of the U.S. Value of the currency. So it's basically government intervention when it's managed. It's managed by the central bank of the country that of reference.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Any other answer? Somebody else can add that some point.
I think in the free float and managed float, it's like we could just distinguish it really easy. Free floating, it's just the market forces such as supply, demand, and supply. And managed floating will be intervention from the government or for the banks.
Not from the banks, from the government bank. You know, that is
Yeah.
Reserve
Central
Bank.
bank.
Yeah, that is a central bank. Yeah. So not by other commercial banks. They are normal participants. So one classic example of free float is the US. US having free float exchange system, and the classic example of managed float system is Chinese system. Okay. Yeah. So, and some other countries like India used to have managed float system, but now they have free float system. So different countries have different ways of doing it. I believe Argentina has a managed float system because Argentinian government want to have control on the currencies, but because their currency was falling, they had experimented with free floating system, but then that resulted into very high inflation in Argentina and all. Yeah. So question number three, we discuss the meaning of the term central bank intervention. How does central bank intervene? So it is Noberto.
Yes, hello. So the central bank intervention term is basically when central banks in any particular nation or government intervene in the foreign exchange market to protect their national currency value. This is done by buying or selling foreign currency, and the objective is to stabilize the exchange rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So any other answer? How do they actually intervene? Let's say they buy or sell dollar, or how do they actually determine the exchange rate? Mm-hmm. Suppose if dollar is going up today and they don't want to see that the dollar is going up, so how do they intervene? Or if dollar is falling, or let's say Chinese government, Chinese central bank, Chinese yuan, Chinese currency. Suppose Chinese yuan is depreciating without any limit, without any control, without any ceiling. So let's say it's falling for last 1 month, and Chinese government want to control the fall of Chinese currency. What will they do?
Yeah. Here the text said that it can intervene in the foreign exchange market by way of selling the US dollar at a lower rate.
Yes.
At a lower rate.
Yes.
Like, for example, the rate could be in US dollar 45 with 50, 57 or 45 with 57. The purpose is that it could be lower. That is the purpose.
Yes. So central bank want to see this exchange rate. What they will do is that they will, make a announcement to other banks. I mean, this is an electronic market now. So central bank is one of the participant also. So they can say that we are ready to sell or buy at this rate. And if you want to buy from us, we are offering at this rate. This is the rate that we want to see in the market. So, and we are offering this at this rate, and other banks can buy at this rate. So automatically other banks will buy if central bank is offering something because it is good for them. So central bank in the process, the rate will be the rate at which central bank is quoting, to the other banks. So it's a practical step. They don't announce overnight, but they buy and sell at the rate that they would like to see in the markets. Yeah, if you read the textbook chapter, it's explained in more detail. In PowerPoint, I have constrained to explain everything. So otherwise, also, if you just watch a video on central bank intervention on YouTube, so you can understand this mechanism in a better way. And number four is Jennifer. Can you invoice in a third currency? For example, you are an exporter, I am an importer. We are in two different countries. And my currency is different, your currency is different. Let's say I'm in Japan. My currency is Japanese yen, and your currency is US dollar. And you are an exporter, and I am your importer. can you invoice? So I would prefer to have my currency to pay, and you will not prefer to have Japanese yen to pay. You will prefer to have your currency. So sometimes, in order to avoid bias of your currency or my currency, we can have we can have a common currency or a third currency. So how does it work?
Okay, yeah, in this case, yes, because as the book mentioned in chapter 17, I think, if the sale price is in third currency, such as sterling, the importer will buy sterling in exchange for dollars to make the payment, and the supplier will then sell the sterling in exchange for yen.
Yeah, that's correct. So yeah, so you can invoice in a third currency. Any other viewpoint on this point? Somebody else? So what is my question, in case if you don't have an answer to that question? What would be your preference? Let's say you are an exporter and your importer would ask you to do the invoicing in importer's currency. Will you prefer that, or will you insist the importer that I would like to invoice in my currency, or are you going to be open, or are you going to be more flexible to invoice in a third currency? This is a question, so anybody can answer.
I think it depends on each case scenario about the exchange rate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you probably would want to look at the forward rates, and see what the market's doing. It might be beneficial, and it will probably determine which currency you may prefer. That would be my main consideration in that case, but I would definitely would consider going for a third currency if it was beneficial.
The point here is like, so as an exporter, I would tend to prefer my own currency in case if my buyer, my importer agrees. But in case if my buyer doesn't agree with my currency, then I might think about either his currency or a third currency. So, so I will have to negotiate. My first point or my first preference will be invoicing in my own currency if I'm an exporter. And if my importer is not happy with that, then I will think about invoicing in either his currency or find a third currency. This is the mechanism. Okay. So it is permitted to invoice in a third currency. For example, many transactions, many overseas transactions between developing countries are settled in a third currency. For example, developing countries' currencies are not considered as major currencies in the world, so many banks don't accept those currencies. So as a result, many companies in developing countries, suppose in case if somebody is buying something in Africa from Vietnam or any other Asian country, what they do is that they have to get the, they might prefer to have a US dollar or euro as a invoicing currency instead of having the currency of an African country. So this is also common because banks all over the world accept US dollar. So they might have a common third currency for invoicing. This is also common. Yeah, so if you invoice in your own currency, you don't need to think about forward contract and so on. But if you invoice in a third currency or your buyer's currency, you might need to think about forward contract and so on. That's the implication. Any questions?
The only countries that do that are those that their currency is devaluated, or other countries do that kind of invoice with a third currency.
Many companies do that. For example, I tell you, I have experience of looking at these kind of things in different countries. And for example, importer in Malaysia and Japan. I mean, exporter in Japan and importer in Malaysia. So Malaysian importer sometimes prefer the invoicing currency as US dollar. So this is also because sometimes two companies, they want a neutral currency or they want a different currency, because to make sure that it is not going to be, I mean, there is no favoritism of using my own currency when I do business. So I can use a third currency. That kind of psychology also works in that. And this one, what is this called? So like I can also tell you another example, another transaction between Korea and Philippines. Korean currency and Philippine currency are not considered as major currencies in the world. So let's say Filipinos are exporting some pineapple from Philippines or banana from Philippines to Korea. Filipinos want invoice either in Filipino currency or in US dollar. But the Korean importer will not prefer Filipino currency because Filipino currency may not be a currency used in Korean banks. So they will say that better you invoice in US dollar so that I can settle the transactions in a better way. Otherwise, invoice in my currency, that is Korean currency, Korean won. So Filipino will not prefer to invoice in Korean currency because, again, banking related problems, and they would not know Korean won will be accepted in all banks in Philippines and so many things like that. And also they will need to convert it in from Korean currency to their currency. If it is dollar, they can even keep us dollar deposit in case when they receive the money, they can either convert or keep us dollar deposit, because dollar is very widely used currencies. The most widely used currencies in the world are dollar, euro, pound sterling, and Japanese yen. These four currencies are accepted everywhere in the world for all reasons. It can be for traveling, it can be for international business. For all reasons, these four currencies are accepted in every bank, in every country, almost everywhere in the world. So these four currencies are preferred currencies for invoicing and exporting and importing also, regardless of the country from where this kind of international business transaction takes place. Any question?